What? Okay. So I'm John. I'm going to talk about the other half of the problem, which is on the production side of the world. So in distribution, we've got, these nice, 5.1 plus 4 blobs of audio. All the channels go together. Everyone has a written down list of left, right, center, whatever order it is. But if you've ever worked upstream in the production world, you recognize that sometimes the producer just says, I want the left channel from camera 3 to show up here. And it's not a negotiation. It's not a, well, let me think about that. It's a, yes, I'm going to go click, click, click and make that happen. And why? There's no why to some of these things. It's because it's wired wrong elsewhere and you're fixing it or whatever. And this is true usually in the front end of facilities. Either you're getting signals in and it's just not lined up the way your plant lines up things, or maybe it's a production environment where that microphone that's on that person's belt pack is coming in through channel 7 of that thing, and you just have to pick it up and get it to the sound desk. There's no rhyme or reason. They're just mono channels. So how do you deal with this need that does really exist to deal with mono-channel granularity in this world of 2110 where we tend to have a lot of multi-channel streams? That's why we're here today. Now, I don't have to tell you, you all seem like people who've touched audio, that audio is always the problem. Every project we stand up, the video is working on the first day, and then we spend the entire rest of the install screwing around with audio. Am I overstating that?
I have no idea what you're talking about.
So, like I said, the back end of the facility, play out, master, audio's nice and arranged, but that's because upstream, somebody went to the trouble of arranging it, and that's the side of the problem we're going to talk about here. But even when it's usefully, perfectly arranged, sometimes you have to fix it. Sometimes you have to just, arrange it in the first place. So all that said, IP didn't make this problem. This isn't a new problem. IP may have made it more, you can do more things, so now you can do them in a more complicated way that's more prone to errors. That could happen, now that we have more audio to mess with. But in any case, in IP, is IP here to help us? Is IP here to hurt us? Or is IP just a fellow passenger? Well, in IP, we tend to organize the audio into streams. And that's AES 67 says you can do a lot of different things. It tells you if you do this, how to do it. It doesn't have too many requirements on what is a given receiver's, what does this generic receiver have to eat? That's actually a really small list, but in any case, in our control world, ISO 4 lists those stream receivers and senders. ISO 5 lets you connect streams. That's all good, right? But if you want to manipulate at that mono-channel level, if you want to say, I need channel 3 from that stream to show up over here at this frame sync on channel 7, how do you do that? Well, you don't do it with ISO 5. So how do you do it? Well, ISO 5 and 4, they're just about streams, moving streams, switching streams. If you need to take a mono channel, how do you do it? That's ISO 8 was invented for this purpose. So that was a long discussion. ISO 8 came along a little later. These numbers are issued in order, so there was a 5 and a 6 and a 7. And ISO 8 came along as the part of a solution to solve this problem. And I could argue that it's an imperfect solution. That's a beer argument, but I could talk about why I think it's an imperfect solution. That might be a Q&A topic. But it's the solution that the consensus body, AMWA, came up with. And it's fine, and I've sworn to say it's great. But anyway, it's okay. The funny thing, ISO 8 is a public API that lets you tell a receiver what to do after the receiver. So it gives the ability for an endpoint device to represent usually there is some kind of audio matrix between the receivers of streams and the consumers of channels inside. And most devices have that matrix. Most devices have a handful of stream receivers. You can imagine being able to control that matrix in an organized way would be helpful to this problem, and it is, and that's what ISO 8 was for. Now, We do have some customers that took the opposite approach and said, well, I'm just going to make every mono channel a separate stream. And if the equipment you have supports enough channels that you could do that, you could do that. And it does work for some value of work. It is a lot of work because you have to configure all those streams. You have to manage them. Every time you hit take, a lot of stuff tries to happen. But it does work in the sense that you get that mono granularity using ISO 4 and 5, and there are production systems that do that. There's also ones that use, take the middle ground and make every stream stereo, and they do the shuffling at stereo, and that actually solves 90% of people's problems, maybe 80, maybe 90, in there somewhere. But, you get a lot of receiving devices if you buy I'll blame tech. You get a Tech Prism. It used to have one stream receiver, now it has two. That's an upgrade. So it can take two 8-channel streams, it's really happy doing that, but it's not going to take 16 mono channels that are all separate. It's just not how it's done. And that's true of a lot of devices that are actually in practice things you can buy, is they are not designed around the idea of having a whole lot of separate stream receivers. They have 1 or 2 or 3 or 4, but not 16, right? So, and not more than 16. Like if you needed your, D plus M plus a bunch of, or M plus E plus a bunch of dialogues, you run out of those 16 even pretty quickly. So, you could, but most people don't. Now, what does it mean when you route streams? Well, it means I have maybe a playout system that's got a 5-1 mix and a stereo mix, and when I route those things here, I route those things to maybe the other MCR. I can make a switch. I can do a breakaway where I take maybe one video and different audios, but that breakaway is at the stream level, right? So, sorry, I can, well, that's, yeah, you've got a very impaired view seat there. So the breakaway is at the stream level, which, in a playout center, maybe that's actually what you wanted. That works. I mean, a lot of systems are built this way. But you don't have a way to express taking a channel from here and doing something special with it. So if ISO 5 by default routes streams, logical streams. But how do you integrate things that aren't consistent? Suppose you have, a pair of 8s and then you have those mixes. What are you going to do with those? How are you going to map those? Because things happen in production. You get last minute signal comes flying in and it's not organized like you wanted, and it's too late to fix it, and shows in 3, 2, 1, you gotta do. So the idea is you'd really like to do track routing, meaning you route the streams and then you control this mapping downstream from the receiver into the actual channels, which as a router user, if you're punching the buttons, your destination in your head is not the stream receiver. The destination in your mind is that channel down there. That's really what the operations team expects, because when they buy an SDI router today that's got audio demuxing on the way in and audio muxing on the way out, and it's got 16 levels of audio, and they go put on the panel, that's what they're doing, is those are the destinations. These are not the destinations. So how do we get to where people get what they want or what they expect out of the tools that we've been building as an industry? That's where this ISO 8 comes in. If you can control this map, then you can implement this feature from a control standpoint. So that's what you want. So for a device that's enabled by ISO 8, the controller can use ISO 8 to manipulate that map. And then if you want to take, a couple of channels from here and do something crazy with them, you can do it, because the control system can route the stream, route the channels, and deliver the route that you asked for with a mono-channel description. It's all well and good. What about, do you need ISO 8? Could you do this without it? Well, yeah, if there was instead like a different API on every device like we have today, and you write a lot of drivers, and as somebody in the control business, like that's work. Customers hate paying for drivers. We hate writing drivers, honestly. It's Nobody's happy with that model. So that's why we need standards, standardized APIs, and that's why ISO 8 as a common API can solve this problem. Now there's a secondary issue though. There's devices that don't support ISO 8. Well, let's talk about the ones that do. So the ones that do, the control system can manipulate the map, it can route the streams, you can deliver mono audio. And you can route, all the way to those destinations straightforward. But what about, okay.
Marching practice.
There really is, okay.
Audio marches on.
People who watch the stream later are going to wonder what just happened. So we talked about earlier devices that don't have a lot of stream receivers. And this is a challenge because even if they supported ISO 8, if they only have 1 or 2 stream receivers, at best you're just going to shuffle channels that are already there. You don't have a way to say, well, I want to add this one rogue commentary feed or something into there because there's just not a third receiver. So devices that don't have very many receivers, or frankly devices that don't support ISO 8, I prefer them as devices that need help. How do you help a device that needs help? And the answer is, well, you wind up needing a helper matrix. So you wind up throwing in some, modest-sized, hopefully, audio matrix that the control system has to, build the streams for this by taking in the right streams here and doing them shuffle externally. And people do this. A lot of networks are built this way. This is actually not an uncommon methodology because it works around the things that either don't support a common API or don't have a lot of stream receivers. And both cases exist in the wild, and I think both cases still get produced in the wild. Like these are not legacy problems. These are still ongoing problems that the industry, we built all these tools. They're very flexible. They can do a lot of things, and you could build a lot of different equipment. And what we haven't developed as an industry yet are the common practices. We have standards that say, if you do it this way. But we don't yet have a lot of common practices that say, generally people always do it this way. And then people build equipment that implements the common practices. We're getting there, but it's like something that we just learn as an industry. If you think, well, no one here is old enough to remember when SDI started, but it was the same kind of, oh, yeah, me too. But it's the same thing happened then. I'm sure the same thing happened in the 50s with color, right? There was a Wild West period, and then people settled into a workflow. And in 2110, it's the same way. There's been a little bit of a Wild West period early on, but here we are in 2024. We've settled into some common workflows, and this is quickly becoming kind of the how we deal with things that need help, and ISO 8 is becoming the how we deal with things that can do it on their own. And the more things you have that can do it on their own, the smaller your helper matrix can be, because it's supporting fewer and fewer downstream things. So practically, as a controller, you have to do both. You have to support the things that need help, but you can use ISO 8 as a common API to deal with device, to directly route to devices that can support that. So what's the status? Well, this ISO 8 is done, finished. In AMWA speak, we call that stable. We realized early on in AMWA that while we continue to improve some documents, and they have little dot versions and so forth, we also have a tag called stable that says, this one's done, this one's stable, you can count on it, you can build equipment around it. So ISO 8 is stable, it hasn't changed in a number of years. But, and when devices adopt it, that's all good. By the way, AMWA specs are free. I mean, free like free beer? No, they're really free. So there actually is specs.amwa.tv, has all of them, and you just, there they are, click, click, click. You can get them on your phone right now. But so as devices adopt it, that's great. But what's the real state? How's it going? Well, it's a little slow to catch on. And I think it's a chicken and egg problem where on the controller side, there hasn't been a huge demand because a lot of the controllers had drivers for things and it just wasn't like really big yet. But also on the device side, it's been a little bit of a challenge. And there's a little bit of a nuance with ISO 8 that it doesn't provide timely status. So if one controller makes a change through the ISO 8 API, there's not really a timely way for anybody else to know that happened. And that's an actual design problem in ISO 8, and that's kind of the discussion topic for the Q&A is there a way to improve that? Is there a reason to improve that? And is there enough willingness in the room for people to actually work on improving it? Because all of these standards and specs and things are developed by committees of the willing. You know, people say, oh, AMWA should do this, but AMWA is just folks like us, right? And without folks like us that actually turn up to a meeting and, you know, nothing happens. So that's sort of my punchline of this is ISO 8 limited because of the status challenge? Is it limited because of just industry getting there? Is it a COVID hangover we just got to get over? Maybe it's all three, but I leave it to questions and comments. Okay.
Anyone have questions?
Somebody. No?
No questions?
She's still got to park the boat, so you know. And by the way, eat the cookies. They're here for you.
Eat the cookies, please.
So is there any way of identifying the content of individual channels within streams? So you showed us the ISO 8 and how that allows you to potentially use a submatrix to select individual flows or individual channels.
Yeah.
But in terms of putting some context-sensitive metadata against each stream,
Well, you know, you're asking the question, but I suspect you know the answer. So in 211030, we added these audio channel labels, I think we called them. And it was an enormously long, convoluted discussion to even think about nomenclature for those. Wes will remember that one well. That was several weeks of everyone's life. And they're optional at the end of the day because a lot of times equipment doesn't know what the channels are, right? So if I'm responsible for taking an SDI and turning it into 2110, it's a very common use case. As a device, I have no idea what's in those channels because nothing tells you on SDI. And sadly, that's caused us to propagate the uncertainty. So there is a nomenclature in the SDP to at least identify the channel ordering within a stream with some labels that might indicate what they are. But in practice, it's unusual that it's filled in. And unfortunately, there's also some devices like encoders I've seen that expect it to be filled in and refuse to encode the audio properly unless it's filled in. And that's been a challenge also. But I think those all got fixed, but there was a period where that was also an issue.
yeah, we use a sort of a routing plane that's above the basic routing plane, and we identify all the streams with language tags and type tags and things. And I think the eventual dream would be to get some of that back actually into the stream description,
And
so that you got some context within the actual flows.
Yep, and I think there's certainly devices where you can push that data down and it shows up in the SDP, but it's like work, right? You got to do it.
Yep.
Well, at that point, you've got to manage your nomenclature as if it's a router database on a source-by-source basis. So it would seem like that's really problematic because it becomes dynamic. It's very different coming from a stereo source versus a mic or two plugged into a camera versus a 5.1. There is no standardization of within any stream, channel 1 is always this and channel 3 is always that. Absolutely. Especially in a production environment, it's literally different on every single logical source. So it almost requires it needs to be fed into the SDP from the router controller because that's the likeliest place, and then it needs to have aliases out of a TSL or something like that on a production by production basis. So it probably can be done. I'm thinking on my feet as I go here. But there's a lot of moving parts.
Right, and one of the challenges with the channel order descriptor, it's called in 211030, is that it's actually required. And yet, as a device, if I have no idea what's in those channels, the worst thing I can do is label them as, oh, this is left, right, center, blah, 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 with no idea if that's true. because now I've created a truth that's not really
A
true.
broadcast service panel in a studio has no idea what is plugged into the XLR jack.
Right, exactly. So, but as a device, I'm required to put a descriptor. So, like by default, for several years, we put a descriptor that says unknown 8 channels.
Yeah.
And that's what you see in almost everything is unknown 8 channels. Because if you require a device to mark something, but it doesn't have the information to actually mark it correctly, the worst thing it can do is mark it incorrectly in a language that looks correct.
And it could be multiple names for one service as well. It
Oh,
could be
sure.
receiver 1 for one person, and it could be English mono mix for another.
Yes.
So
Yes,
it's-
that
we're
too.
kind of-
That's
So
why I was saying the aliases.
yeah, unfortunately, the meaning of the channels is up in human space. And several layers down in these APIs, the meaning of the channels isn't known by the devices that are making those APIs.
We define it in human space.
Yeah.
That's where it stays. at
But
the moment.
Yeah.
that's why the SDP, the source device can't create the SDP. The broadcast controller has to probably modify it because the broadcast controller is the interface to the human level. Either that or the tally system that's putting up the UMDs and feeding channel names to the mixing desk.
Yeah, although it's rare that people propagate meaningful audio names into the tally system today. Maybe in the future.
It's actually,
Is it?
it's starting to happen.
Okay.
On the channel labels in dash 30,
Yes.
if that was to become more important and in systems, could we have immersive formats? There's a huge problem with a plethora of different immersive formats.
If you'd like to start a project in 32NF to enlarge the universe of channel labels, that would be an easy thing to do.
Okay, not me, but I know a man who.
Oh, Kent
can.
Terry would carry that sword, yes.
Not Ken, but someone else. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, that'd be great. I'll
I have
take that up.
Loop us in because we'd be very interested.
So in your example, you're talking about the mono sources which might be in the wrong place on the stream or want to reshuffle. It's not so much that left and right is swapped or something. So I was thinking, why wouldn't you treat a mono source like a mono stream, a one-channel stream? Because since it was once one XLR put in some like a microphone,
Yes.
and for some reason, and I can understand reasons, but channels are combined, like an 8-channel stream or whatever. And now we're trying to solve the fact that they are combined in one stream. But there is enough capacity and timing and timestamps and whatever. So
You could build a system with mono-channel streams, and some do. The real challenge is if you've got a mix of, you could make things that are mono-mono, things that are stereo-stereo, things that are 5-1, 5-1. The challenge becomes in the receiver side, how do you marshal those into the places they're supposed to go? That's really what the APIs help. So once you solve the receiver issue about pegboarding those streams, then you can deal with the universe of, a mix of monos and stereos and whatever on the source side. It actually is enabled by fixing the receiver end.
yeah, so the receivers like a mixing desk or intercom, whatever,
Yeah.
should by design have multiple stream receivers in order to accomplish the capacity it would provide.
Right.
But the
Well,
vast
multiple stream
majority-
receivers and the ability to control the shuffle. Yeah.
The vast majority of receiving devices by default have 4 audio receivers per video. There are some with 2, there are some with 1, there are a handful with more. So if you want to get 16 or 32 channels in, you have to aggregate into that number of receivers. Either that or people have to rewrite the firmware that's driving their NICs because there's a limited number of IP sockets. So that forces you into aggregating into the streams, which is illogical from a production standpoint completely. But it's where we are in hardware right now. And the other thing that happens is in a large production facility, actually now distribution with immersive, you could end up with 40, 50, 60,000 multicast streams if you're doing mono channels very easily. And that now complicates what the switches have to handle. It makes your salvos operate slower because now they're switching massive numbers of streams. So it's not, you are in no way wrong from a production standpoint. You are absolutely right. But our limitations are in several places in hardware and base software now. So I have to guess it'll be a while before we can get there. And these are all compromises in my mind.
Yeah. But it's, you know, as an industry, it is about getting there. And that's like why I talk about this topic today, is because I'm trying to stoke the discussion of how do we get there? Can we build some more, you know, demand for devices to be a little smarter on the receive side so that we can actually use the APIs we've defined to do the work that we're all trying to do.
If you could make a wish and
Are
design.
we trying to wrap or are we okay?
Very good.
Okay, sorry.
Design and design from the ground up and say, okay, I can dictate the whole industry. What would be your what would be your vision? Would the vision be single mono channels everywhere and every device will support this, or
No, I think that
idea for
trying to have a lot of mono channels in the network complicates the network significantly. If you look at the new crop of sort of Pro AV switches coming from Netgear and people like that, their main sort of way their spec is different from the really big Aristas and Ciscos is the number of concurrent TCAM entries, the number of concurrent multicasts. So that is, you know, not a direction that's, you know, plus Dave's point about the, you know, salvo quickness and things, you know, it's a transaction volume challenge when you're switching. So if I gave advice, and I'd have to make products, so I have to give advice to my own team, it's to have some more stream receivers on devices and expose that matrix so that a control system can actually use it. And I think that gets you to where more of the stream shuffles and one-off mono stitchings can be accommodated in the devices you have, and then just have that little helper matrix for the handful of things that don't have enough receivers or don't have controllables. But, you know, making that workflow work and be more installable and more usable is kind of where I think we're going to wind up as an industry. That'll go from being a, you know, a feature on some systems to a feature on most systems.
Thank you.
Right. Anybody else? Nope. Oh, okay. One more.
Does the 08 deal with, is it just purely kind of the matrix routing at the just after the receivers, or does it also deal with the kind of the 05 subscriptions as well, or does it has to be an 05 followed by an 08?
It has a way not to, but everybody I've talked to about it tends to associate the channels to the stream receivers because that's what the controller has to understand. In principle, 08 could probably model like an SDI input and how you take its channels, but I've never seen anyone implement that, and I've never seen a controller expect that. Now, ISO 8 also does have a way to describe the back end of a device, how you marshal the channels into the sender, but I haven't seen anybody use that either. I think that's usually that's set up kind of statically, and then it's the receiver that needs the dynamicism.
We are at time.
Oof.
If you have a registration,
Eat more cookies.
reservation for the next cruise, you are welcome to stay on. If you don't, we're going to ask you to disembark.